Welcome to the episode today. So great to see you guys. Let's go ahead and jump in. We've been talking about team building here in the last couple episodes, and we've really had that as a theme for almost this past full season. I was looking back today on some of the podcasts that we've done, and really, team building has been that theme that we've been pushing for a while. But we really want to pause on that just kind of for a moment here for this episode, and really talk about a mindset shift in leadership that really is crucial to your success as a leader and to the success of your team. And what do you do when the unexpected happens? Um, we all want to be that quick thinker that jumps into action when something happens to correct it. But a lot of times our emotions can get in the way. But before we get into that, Blake, how was your morning?
Yeah, so obviously we've scripted that part out, right?
Just a little.
Because we had a different direction planned for what we'd be doing today on the podcast. And this morning, I get up real early and I got up, felt pretty good, went to the gym, had a decent workout, even had a little like enough time to like lay on the massage bed at the gym.
Mm,
Don't think like people are there like working. That's not how it is. Okay. It's
no,
like
it's not quite like that.
hydro massage. Okay. But anyway, did that, came back home, showered, got dressed and cleaned up, and was about to go into my own like meditation time and stuff. Went and got a to get my tea going, and I just stepped in a puddle of water at my kitchen area. And
Mm,
I was like, well, the kids probably, did something, and took one more step into another puddle of water. And then I realized that puddle was just the floor and
mm.
was like, oh boy. So
It's the
this
worst
is
feeling.
this is it, right? So and then I was just like, I took a breath because looking around, I couldn't see what was happening. And then all of a sudden I saw a drip come from one of the water lines overhead. And and this was in my basement, right? So I looked up, saw the water line. It was the one going to the fridge, and it was just like immediately I have a natural tendency to a high intensity, which is just inside something happens. My first emotional response is shots of cortisol and high
Yes.
intensity. The adrenal glands are pumping
Yep.
it, and so just immediately I just like took a deep breath and was like, okay, I had plans for this morning to get going. Those aren't happening and I just need to deal with this. And so um after I took that breath, fixed the water line in about 30 minutes and still had time to do some of the things I wanted to. And it's like, why would I tell any of that story? Well, as I'm fixing it, I noticed that the way I was going about it was different. Okay. Blake 5 years ago, 10 years ago would have been tearing the rest of the house down because the house was garbage. And, that would have been me because I was emotionally stupid about things. Right. And so um, I think immediately I was like, man, you know what good leadership is. And obviously I wasn't leading anyone in that moment, but I just think day to day as we go through things, I think of that Mike Tyson quote, like everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Right. Like that is
Catches me every
essentially
time.
essentially that idea that we're gonna have plans. We're gonna have ideas of what we want to do. But as soon as something happens, how are you going to respond to that? Because
Yeah.
the way you lead people is going to be connected to the way that you respond to stress. So,
Mhm.
another quote I think about, I don't remember who said this, but basically the idea, I mean, a lot of people have said it over the years, but something to the effect that like no plan survives the first contact with the enemy.
Mm.
Eisenhower, we said this on this podcast before. Eisenhower said that all plans are pointless, but planning is indispensable, right? And so we've
Yeah.
talked about some of this stuff before, but really the question is, how do you deal with that curveball and that initial burst of emotion um, on on whether you're going to start connecting with that curveball, right? Like, because when someone's at bat, like we have that term curveball because of baseball, right? Nothing, no surprise there. But as
Right.
someone is throwing a curveball, it looks a certain way. and then it changes, right? It's coming at you, and being able to identify the curveball and identify and plan for the curveball, right? It is not, hey, let's just plan for one type of pitch. Like we have to be expecting that curveball.
Yeah.
We've got to learn to expect the inevitability of things not going according to plan, because that is
Yeah.
going to happen more than it's not going to. Like we can't be offended that something's happened to us. You know,
Yeah.
I the world didn't respect my plans. The world didn't respect my timeline and everything I had planned here. And how dare it? Right? This is ridiculous. The world's always out to get me. No, the world is always just changing. It's full of variables
Mhm.
like that you didn't think of, you can't control. And the only thing that you
Yeah.
can truly control is your mindset or the way that you're going to respond to the change, to the curveball, to the stress. So when we become the people who can manage the stress well and lead in moments of chaos and confusion and curveballs, we're going to be able to do what so many others can't do. Okay? And that's really like as I thought about this morning, that's what I kept coming back to is good leaders are not ones who don't have stressful moments. They're not ones who
Yeah.
don't have multiple variables hitting them. They're not lucky and never have to deal with it.
Yeah.
It's that they know how to manage and wade through stress. And
Mhm.
they are absolutely expecting things not to go according to plan. I can always tell when a leader is struggling here by how they talk about, man, if we just would have planned better, if we just would have planned better, if we just, that's all I ever hear. I realize that there's a circumstantial leadership that they're living in that they're going to have to grow through because leadership just based off of circumstances isn't going to do much. How we deal with those circumstances, how we think through those circumstances is going to respond how we think and lead others. 100%. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. But I think about and I know I talk about like NASA and the space game all the time. I've written about it extensively. I love it. I am actually not a huge like space nut like most people. So, but I'm actually way
Really?
more a team nut. I really am. I'm just like I love the team aspect of what NASA had to pull off, and I think through that time we just got so many good lessons. But when we're talking, we've talked in the past about um, just how much NASA didn't know going
Mm.
into the moon game, right? Like,
Mhm.
and how like there was just constantly adjusting to new variables, all the way even up to the Apollo 11 landing on the moon within the last like 13 minutes, right? Or it was crazy. Like I was there's a really good BBC podcast on I think it's called 13 Minutes to the Moon, and
Mm.
it just is breaking down everything they were going through in those last minutes and seconds. But remember, this had been going on since like 1963, and the
Yep.
development for this one goal had been going on for 7 to 10 years up to those points. So, as you're thinking through that, there were like massive things happening within the last 13 minutes as they were
Yeah.
getting to the moon. What, NASA didn't plan enough? Like, that's the thing is there are different variables they had to deal with. Uh, 3 things that I remember about, and just learning about when they were in that last few minutes. First one was they ended up missing their landing spot by 4 miles, which is crazy.
Wow.
Like, and it had to do with how, the the lunar module Eagle, right? The Eagle has landed. It was
Yep.
called Eagle. I want to say Columbia was the control module that they were in, but as it, pushed off from there, it pushed off with more force, just more force than they were expecting. Okay, that moment
Yeah.
pushed off with more force. All of a sudden they were off by 4 miles. Why is that a big
Jeez.
deal? Because we don't know the moon. We
Right.
we haven't been there.
Yes.
We have sent like non-manned things there to check it out and to get density of like the space dust. That was a terrifying. They didn't know if it was like quicksand or if it was, just dust. And so as they were starting to do this, they pushed off and started going that way, and it was tense. Like they were terrified about like once you get past a certain point in your descent, it's called dead man's curve, like, you're landing or you're
Ugh.
dying. And
Oh,
so they were
gross.
doing calculations left and right, and there were even times they weren't even telling, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, they weren't even telling them what's going on. They were just like, "Nope, we're good," and they're like freaking out, doing calculations, and,
Yes.
but they missed it by 4 miles, which is crazy.
To your point too, like, I just think it's interesting. You brought up several different instances that there's no way they could have planned for that. Right?
Mm-mm.
They had no idea that the eagle was gonna push off at a different rate or a different speed or anything like that, or a different force. They had no way of knowing that. And if you
Yeah,
think about it too, this is Apollo 11, which means there have been 10 missions before this, all that are preparation for this, right?
yeah,
They've all been preparation for this very moment. So anybody who says, "Well, you just didn't prepare enough, you just didn't plan enough," I think this is a perfect example of that not being true. Just this one instance of missing by 4 miles. They
yeah,
planned for years and years and years. They had 10 missions of unmanned flight, trying to make
that's
sure
right.
they figured all these things out. And then all of a sudden, that one thing threw them off that they could not have planned for. Sorry,
Yep.
just a thought as you were talking about that. I'll let you tell us about the other things that went wrong too.
No, that's good. It's a good point. I mean, they had so many different, um, issues and things that they had prepared for. And I think that takes you back to, so should we just jump in a rocket ship and go? Like,
Mm,
no. There was a ton, like, all that preparation was good. It did get us to where we are. Things wouldn't have happened otherwise if we didn't have all of those other missions. But they were, because of that initial boost, they were 4 miles off. They they were also running out of fuel. They were 30 seconds from running out of fuel. That's not a great thing if your destination is the moon and the
no.
next person is up above you and the other people are however many thousand miles away, and I don't know the number, so if it's less than 1,000, then I'm just a dummy. Let's get over it, okay? But anyway, they were running out of fuel and they were 30 seconds from it. As soon as they landed, there was another issue. And this one, like, I just learned about recently, and it was like, holy crap, their fuel line was starting to send signals that it froze. And so all of the pressure on the backside was like, and all the fumes and stuff in the fuel line, it was building up and was about to explode. And so they
Oh
had to
my
deal with that.
gosh.
They had to respond to that in the moment. And
Yeah.
remember, they don't have a Jiffy Lube right down the road. They have whatever is in that little module to do
Yeah.
with. And so it was like everybody on this Apollo team had to see it like, I've got to be a MacGyver. Like, if you got a paper clip, that's a resource. I'm seeing it that way. But they weren't like, oh, it didn't go according to plan. This is the worst thing in the world. And they had to deal with it. And so they were great at being leaders. And that's what we need, is people who can manage the stress well.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I love this story. And as you were talking about it too, I thought of Apollo 13. I've seen the movie probably a million times. Love the movie. My favorite part, I think, is when they find out that there's an issue with, I think it's the air conditioning unit or something. And a group of scientists go immediately and start building things out of what's just available within within the return module. And that's it. And they tell these guys, put these pieces together. And the guys, the astronauts are like, they're pulling like dishes from the sink and all these other like random things pulled together and it works. But
Yeah.
it had they not had that attitude of, well, let's just adjust and make something work with what we've got, they never would have made it back. They never would have landed back safely from their trip. I think you said this at the beginning, and I think it's really crucial. You said in the moment of dealing with that issue that came up this morning with the water, you took a deep breath, right?
Mm,
And I think that really, as we're looking at like, what do we do now?
mm,
How do we change our mindset on this? I think that's your first step: is take that breath, because, and I'm going to have you talk about this. You mentioned cortisol. I want you to get more into that. Um, I know that from my experience, my first reaction to things is always very explosive.
mm,
It's bigger than it was supposed to be. It's going to be worse. It's going to be terrible. All these things. And I was talking to my therapist the other day about this, And I said, even in the moment when I say this, and I realized that I was like, when I talk about situations going poorly, I talk about things exploding. And that's my mindset on that sometimes. And it was a great realization of, okay, I need to change my head. I need to change my mindset on where this goes. But can you tell us a little bit about cortisol? I know we've talked about in the past, but how that affects our ability to make decisions and things like that?
Absolutely. So, because I am a neuroscientist and know everything about the brain, let me tell you my findings. No,
I love it.
but on the flip side, like I do love neuroscience and think it's fascinating because so much of, when people like Descartes said, what do you say? I think, therefore I am. Like, I don't know that he knew how onto it he was and that how his thoughts affected everything, but our thoughts, the brain center, the organ, the brain is sending signals constantly to deal with things. And cortisol is, it's released in such a way that it's more that fight or flight type of thing, right? It's the stress response. And so, like, it's great if you're running into a tiger or a bear and in the wild. It's great because what it's doing is preparing you for something, because the stress is so much that it should prepare you for these physical responses, these like these brain responses of like, what do I need to do? It needs to be very simple, right? It needs to be this or this. And so cortisol is doing a really good thing. And stress, we've said this before. Stress is not bad. Yeah, it
Mm,
gets neutral. It's our thoughts and our responses to it that do anything. And I think one of the problems is, and there are tons of books about this, just out in leadership and science communities. But as you are dealing in our day to day, we do not have it. And I want to be careful here. I'm not saying that life's not stressful. Okay, our stresses are way less life threatening. Okay, and so because we haven't dealt with a ton, and obviously this is general here. I'm not saying this for everyone, but because we here in America, in our comfort of our homes and stuff, are not dealing with the same day to day life or death moments, or at least
mhm,
experiencing those moments, our cortisol in our brain are, I don't want to say getting weaker, like we're getting weaker in our mindsets of like just what our what our level of tension, like we're just like, oh, this is a little more stressful, so I'll release a whole bunch. And now we're getting overwhelmingly stressed by things that are maybe not near as, it's a lion, right?
yeah.
It's more like, oh, I wonder what they're thinking about me. Cortisol, 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 stress, 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 stress. And the thing
Yeah.
is we're actually having more stress because we don't understand the variance of stress and how much should be released and how much isn't. Like, we're constantly in that releasing state that we're doing a ton of harm to ourselves. So when people are like, stress will kill you, there's truth to that, but it's not so much the stress, it's our regulation of that stress that's going to hurt
Mm,
us.
yeah.
The effects of that stress or whatever on your brain, especially in the prefrontal cortex, like this is where we actually do our thinking, and like this is where we're thought processing, our memory and our emotional regulation, where all of that's happening. Cortisol, like it causes, what is that called? Like almost like an atrophy of that part of
Mm,
your brain. Okay. So
okay.
it can, all that stress can literally change the way your brain is.
Mm,
And so it can start hurting a ton because cortisol is fight or flight, one or the other. It is not a thinking thing. And so a lot of times, this is why we have fog, like brain fog and stuff, is because we're not able to think rightly because we have too much cortisol in our brain. And so this is like when you said take a breath, you're right. Why? Because there's something about a breath? Maybe. Like just maybe.
yeah.
Because the idea of a breath, when you you're changing your body's state, you're changing
Yeah.
your mental process, you're stopping. There is no fight, there is no flight when you're taking a breath, a deep
Right.
breath. You're susceptible, you're changing state. Cortisol is a great thing because it has like our best interest at heart. But at the end of the day, it can wreak havoc if we can't learn how to use it well, and allow it to be used for the right things, and then
Mm,
to not allow it to be used for other things, or at least at that same capacity.
yeah.
When we believe that we just like things should, and I use that word big time, should be a certain way, then and then they don't go that way, we go to extreme stress as if we're facing down a bear. We got to be able to start regulating our understanding and valuation of like what deems a certain amount of stress. And I know that it's like, what, how you do that? You just start regulating that? Well, no, but you maybe like I don't
Yeah.
know. I just know that adding pivot points or those moments of just transition when you experience something, having a plan for the unaltered plan is big, right? So
Yeah.
when we experience this kind of thing, when this happens, what have we already practiced to transition? Like the deep breath. When you walk downstairs and you step in water,
Yeah.
having a plan to immediately, and I did. I took a deep breath, changed my emotional level state, took a deep breath and said, "All right, let's deal with this." And by doing that, it helped tremendously.
Yeah.
So, one thing I would say is we must still plan. Like
Mhm.
I don't. Hopefully, you've got that at this point.
Yeah.
The Apollo people, NASA, sorry, the Apollo people, they planned tremendously, but knew that
Mhm.
their plans were going out the window at times. Um, in the Art of War, I don't remember how to say his name. Is it Sun Tzu? I think it is.
I
He
think
says
so,
that
yeah.
victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and seek to win, right? So he's constantly getting in the fact that it's a mind game and that we must get to those points and have those pivot points and those transition points set up, that we're not jumping in and saying, all right, let's see if we can do this. We know we're going to deal with the unknown. We've
Mm.
planned for it, but we're going
Yeah.
to deal with it and not a place of high cortisol, high stress, because we're not going to think right. We're going to deal with it on our own terms and with things already set up. So, got to still plan. The second thing I'd say is keep most of your plan. So when something happens,
Mhm.
don't throw it out the door. I used to do speeches and I was horrible, still not great at speeches. Okay. But I used to do speeches, and anytime I thought like of a good thing, I'd say it and then throw everything I had spent so much
Oh
time on out the
gosh.
door. And then after I had said the good thing, I couldn't
You have
reintegrate back
nothing
into my
else.
speech
Yeah.
to give. And then I'm like, yeah, guys, so things are good. Things are smart and we should be about things. And if you think things are good too, then you're gonna like things. And I lost it, right? Like just gone. And so it's good to keep most of your plan intact and just adjust. Again, already being prepared for pivot points. Um,
Mhm.
I think it's a really good idea to be ready for first impact, right? Because that's just what Tyson said is it's the plan is good until you're punched in the mouth. That's the first impact. I think it's
Yeah.
a good idea to part of your plan, part of what you're doing, be prepared for the first impact. What are your plans for that? I don't think try to plan out to your third and fourth impact because you don't know, right?
Yeah.
Like the first impact, though, you're kind of expecting, I know I'm going to get hit. So, what do we do when we finally get hit?
Right.
The new planning you come up with in that time has got to be geared towards that current reality. So, right, like if you get punched in the eye, what do you go through? Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing now? What are the plans to protect and attack? If you get punched in the nose, what are the plans to protect and attack? If you get punched in the mouth, like Tyson said, or in the kidney, what are your plans to protect and
Yeah.
attack? If we can't do those things, and we're not planning for that first impact, then it will mess us up pretty long term. So
Yeah.
definitely need to think through that.
Yeah, I like that too. I think there's a part of that you kind of alluded to about your plan. Don't be so tied to it, right? Because I think we've all been there. I know I've been there. When you hit that plan and it doesn't, something happens in the very first moment of something. I've been there. I've done some public speaking in my past too, so I understand where you're coming from. When you have that idea, you say it, and then you have nothing else after that. I've
Right.
been there, and a lot of that, I don't. Sometimes I don't even say those things in the moment because I'm so tied to my plan
Mm,
that I don't know what to do when something needs to be adjusted. I can't adjust with it, right? So don't be so tied to your plan that you've created. And to Mike Tyson's point, like everybody has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. Well, what if you got planned to hit in the mouth and somebody hits you in the kidney and you haven't planned for that?
right.
Well, you can't you can't then say, well, there goes my whole plan. I guess it's or actually you can't say I'm going to stick with my original plan and act as if they hit me in the mouth when your kidney is, in pain and you're potentially bleeding, all these other things. So don't be so stuck to your plan. Have an open mind that you can make those adjustments. One of the things I think is kind of next step on our process here is jump into what you think is hardest first.
Mm,
We allow the difficult things to grow with time. It becomes more of a monster. And a lot of times, too, the things that we think are difficult may not actually be difficult. They may just seem difficult to us. It may seem like this big, long, hairy thing. Recently, I had this form I needed to fill out for work, and I thought it was going to be this big, long form because I've done several of these before, and it came across as like 8 questions, and it took me less than 3 minutes to fill it out, and it was great.
right.
But my thinking going into it was, okay, here goes another 2 hours of my day before I can jump on something else. And it was very quick. We make those assumptions about things without full knowledge of them. And especially when we get a curveball, we make the assumption that it's going to be really difficult, that it's going to be really hard. And that's not always the case. Sometimes, yeah, it's true. It's going to be hard. It's going to be really suck. But comes in the next point, and this is a mindset shift. You will get through it, right?
Mm,
We're not going to get to the end of it and go, okay, everything in my life is over now, right?
mm,
We're going to get through this. It
yeah.
it may suck. It's going to be hard, but those we'll get through those curveballs. We'll get through the difficulty. Um, Jen Ramo, we've talked about her before. She's been on the podcast a couple times. And if you haven't listened to it, episode 19 and 45, please go back and listen to it. Fantastic time talking with her. She has a plan that her and I actually were talking about yesterday. She has a plan set out for difficult situations that come up in life, for curveballs that come up in life. And it's not everything that she's thought of, but she's got a basic framework for, hey, the curveball comes in. Okay, I address it, I deal with it, and I move on. And I keep moving and I keep fighting and I keep going through it. And I don't sit with it. I don't let it consume my life. I don't let it stop me from doing things. Just fantastic mindset there of being able to just keep going through it because she's going to get through it. And she has overcome some incredibly difficult circumstances in her life. Absolutely incredible. If you want to know more, listen to the episodes. They're really good, but you can see that attitude come through as we talk with them, or as we talk with her. Blake, you've said this before. You have a friend who once has said, the situation is never as good as it seems, and it's never as bad as it seems. And I think
Right.
this was in context to political situations, but it really applies to everything.
Oh,
You
for
know,
sure.
it's never as good as it seems, and it's never as bad as it seems. It's always our emotions get us into that state of hyper awareness of all the problems. And then our solution is let's go Hulk on everything, right?
Right.
We have our project manager. I love his attitude on this, and he said it. A lot of these things coming from yesterday, guys, too. He said it yesterday to us, and I latched onto it and I thought it was really good. He's dealing with a medical situation right now, and he said, either I'll get better or I won't. And I just like, it sounds
Right.
terrible, but it's true. It is so true. And his perspective on it is, why should I get upset? Why should I get worried about it? There's nothing I can do about it right now. So either I'm going to get better or I'm not, and I'm going to go get it
Yeah.
taken care of.
Right.
Right. Um, Chuck Swindoll, great quote here. He said,
Mm,
life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it.
love that.
It's just an incredible quote and a good reminder. It's about our reactions. It's about how we deal with situations. That's what makes the difference in our our place as a leader, our growth as a leader, our success as a leader, our team's leadership, or our team's success rather. That's what makes a difference, is our reaction to it. And that's what we really wanted to bring out today, was those couple steps, those items to help you get to a point where we can have a different mindset on curveballs, because they're going to happen. Curveballs will happen all the time. We all say it's just life, right? But when it does happen, we react as though we weren't expecting it. We say it's just life, but then we're not really believing that it's just life. As a leader, having the expectation of curveballs will set you and your team up for success, regardless of the obstacles that you have to overcome. They're going to be there. You're going to have to deal with them. But if you have that mindset, you're going to be successful. We're not saying that mindset is going to simply immediately fix the problems, because that's not reality either. But it will reduce that difficulty. It'll give you a clearer view to be able to overcome them better. Remember, take a breath. Give time for that cortisol to go down. Stick to the plan with little adjustments. Tackle the thing that you believe is going to be the hardest first. And remember, you're going to get through it. Thank you for joining us this week on the Ridgeline Leadership Podcast. See you guys next time.